To talk about the nanny state, but I want to start by saying that I really hate the term nanny state, and I hate it for two reasons. Firstly, I hate it because I quite liked my nanny, which is what we called my grandmother, and I liked her not least because she was the opposite of the nanny state. Her daily breakfast was a bottle of stout. That's all she had for breakfast. She only ever ate stale bread because she thought it tasted nicer than fresh bread. And she smoked all the time. And if anyone ever complained about her smoking, she said they could always go outside and wait there until she had finished and then come back in. So I've always found the term nanny state very jarring, because where my family comes from, in the kind of wild west of Ireland, nannies, or nanas as we call them, were actually pretty hardcore people. You know, they lived spectacularly unhealthy lives and they still managed to make it to 100. So, the second reason I hate the term nanny state is because I think it massively underestimates the authoritarian problem we face in the 21st century. It's such a quaint term. It kind of gives the impression that we are surrounded by, you know, these kind of bossy, annoying Mary Poppins figures, kind of wagging their fingers at us and telling us not to smoke, not to drink, and so on. It's such a soft term, implying that the problem with the state today is that it's a bit patronising, a bit whiny, always trying to stop us from having a party, from having a laugh, and so on. And while it's true that we do live under killjoy regimes that don't like the idea of us cutting loose, that is only one small part of the problem we face in the 21st century. What we have in the 21st century is not just a nanny state, but an utterly out of control bureaucratic imperative. We have an utterly unhinged interventionist dynamic that has lost any sense of what areas of life it is appropriate for the authorities to intervene in, and what areas of life it is not appropriate for the authorities to intervene in. We live under governments that relentlessly interfere in family life, in home life, in private life, in every area of our lives. Governments which think nothing of telling parents how to parent, telling adults how to have sex, telling the rest of us how we should live, when we should smoke, how we should drink, effectively trying to reshape our minds and our behaviour to suit the government's agenda. We live, in other words, under a state that thinks citizens should have no inner moral life of their own. And we should stop making this sound cutesy by calling it a nanny state and face up to the fact that the modern state actually has more in common with the Inquisition than it does with Mary Poppins. And I think too often us libertarians, whether we're on the right or on the left, I think I'm the only one, too often we become caricatures of ourselves by only talking about lifestyle forms of nanny statism. So we obsess, for example, over smoking bans in public places, or the fact that you can't get pissed at 4 AM in some parts of Australia. We obsess over drinking, smoking, those kind of lifestyle issues which people generally find quite annoying. And I agree that these are pesky and unnecessary government interventions into our lives. I agree that we should oppose them, we should stand up to them, we should fight for the right of private institutions and organisations to allow people to smoke or not allow people to smoke according to their choice. But it is very important that we don't lose sight of the fact that they are actually fairly minor facets of a far larger problem. They are fairly minor aspects of what I would see as a state war on the life of the mind and the life of the soul in the 21st century. What we have today, and I think we really need to bear this in mind all the time, what we have are governments that have shifted from focusing on infrastructural and economic issues towards obsessing over individuals' behaviour, thoughts and relationships. For most of the modern era, governments had a fairly narrow remit. Their job was to keep their nations secure, to enable prosperity, and to protect property and individuals from criminal harm and criminal damage. That was it. Today, in a massive turnaround, we have what the British Labour Party calls the politics of behaviour, or what the ever-growing nudge industry calls behavioural economics, or the politics of behavioural insight. We have governments that have moved from keeping the external infrastructural world chugging along to governments that are obsessed with correcting the internal world of their citizens. And I think we need to recognise how much this represents a winding back of the gains of the Enlightenment itself. Because the Enlightenment was based fundamentally on a belief that governments should only concern themselves with outward things and not with inward things. So in his letter on toleration, written by John Locke in 1689, he said his aim, this was one of the first documents really of the Enlightenment, Locke said his aim was to settle the bounds that lie between the business of government and the business of morality. He said that a government should only concern itself with the following: the safety and security of the Commonwealth and of every particular man's goods and person. It should have nothing to do, he said, with the inward persuasion of the mind. As he so clearly put it, and I think these words should be burned into the minds of every nanny-stater, the care of souls does not belong to the magistrate. Every man's soul belongs to himself and is to be left to himself. Today, we have the opposite of that. We have governments that are largely bereft of ideas for how to improve the infrastructural stuff and the economic stuff, and who now concern themselves obsessively with the inward lives of their citizens. And yes, one form that takes is the nanny state, the annoying meddling into lifestyle issues. And these nanny state interventions do indeed capture how zealous the modern state is in its determination to intervene in our lives. So, for example, we now have governments that think nothing of telling us where we can smoke, stopping us from seeing cigarette branding, preventing us from drinking after a particular hour, plastering our foodstuffs with warnings, banning adverts for so-called junk food, even though there is no such thing as junk food, stopping our children from having salt at school, rifling through our children's lunchboxes in search of contraband, such as chocolate and crisps and so on, banning drugs, banning absinthe, banning large servings of fizzy drinks. And what these nanny state actions do show is that governments now aspire even to control what we put into our bodies, even how healthy we are. And that too runs counter to the Enlightenment. It runs counter to the Enlightenment belief that people should have the right to make the wrong choices, including the choice to make themselves ill. So let's go back to John Locke. Locke asked the following question: what if a man neglect the care of his own health? He said, should the magistrate provide by law that a man shall not become sick? And he answered, no. The government should not tell people how sick or how healthy they should be. We should be free even to be sick if we want to. And he said the following, this is how he put it: laws provide as much as is possible that the goods and healths of subjects be not injured by the fraud and violence of others. They do not guard them from the negligence of the possessors themselves. In other words, individuals should be so free, so in control of their own destinies, that they should be allowed to allow their bodies and their minds to fall into disrepair. And today's nanny-staters really need to bear that in mind. They need to bear in mind that their attempt to make us healthy, to force us to be healthy, is another transgression of the Enlightenment. They even want dominion over our stomachs, our livers, our general health. That is the zealousness of the modern state. And that represents a real diminishing of individual sovereignty. and of our moral autonomy, of our right to determine our destinies free from external intervention. But alongside that nanny state stuff, which is indeed annoying and anti-enlightenment and illiberal and everything else, there are other worse forms of state authoritarianism which I think libertarians too often ignore. Firstly, there is the nudge industry, which people will have heard of. And to my mind, these nudgers make the nanny staters look like a tea party in comparison. Where the nanny state is basically concerned with controlling and policing our bodies, the nudge industry wants to colonize our minds. It wants to colonize what we think. And nudging, which started in America and has since spread to Britain and is now gathering pace in Australia, I understand, is based on the idea that governments should make decisions on our behalf. So nudging takes many forms. Firstly, there is the very famous example of putting an image of a fly on a urinal so that men will urinate in the right direction, reduce splashing, make everything nice and tidy. But there are also discussions about reducing road space in order to nudge people to walk more or to cycle more, and in the process become less fat, more eco-friendly, and so on. There are discussions about changing the packaging on certain food products to nudge people to buy healthy stuff, which will have nice packaging, and not to buy unhealthy stuff, which will have ugly packaging, and so on and so forth. And the idea behind all this nudging is that individuals are so irrational, so incapable of working out for themselves what is the best way to live, that we need officials to nudge us in the right direction, to nudge us towards living what they consider to be the right kind of life. So in Britain, in Downing Street itself, we have something called a behavioural insight team, which is as Orwellian as it sounds. Its job is, and I quote, its job is to change the way citizens think. Now, I don't know if you remember what democracy is supposed to be about. It seems such a long time ago that we had anything resembling democracy. Democracy was supposed to be where governments represented what voters thought. Now we have a situation where governments take it upon themselves to shape and determine what people think. Nudging represents a complete and utter warping of the historical idea of democracy. And the Behavioural Insight team recently published a report which said that people are systematically irrational, and therefore the government must change the way people act. And how should the government do this? The Behavioural Insight team said it should do this by becoming our surrogate willpower. That's the actual phrase it used, surrogate willpower. Now I think we should just take a moment to reflect on how terrifying an idea that is. Because the suggestion is that people are so foolish, so fickle, so systematically irrational, that officialdom must become our minds. It must become our willpower. It must make decisions on our behalf. And I think what we have here is a very clear attempt to colonize the mind itself, with officials imagining that they have the right and the ability to reshape our minds. Now, that is totalitarianism. And in fact, anyone who has read 1984 will know that the ending of that book, the terrible ending of that book, is when the state occupies Winston Smith's mind. And the torturer, O'Brien, actually says to Smith, "We create human nature. Men are infinitely malleable." That is precisely what the nudge industry thinks. That it is the creator of human nature. That it is the surrogate willpower of malleable mankind. And in fact, the massively contradictory term that the nudge industry uses to describe what it does, which is libertarian paternalism, actually brings to mind the 1984 slogan, "Freedom is slavery." Because the slogan of the nudge industry is actually liberty is paternalism. That is their slogan if you strip it down. That's the rallying cry of the new invaders of the human mind. You can also see the colonization of the mind in the politics of happiness. Across the Western world now, we have whole sections of government devoted to measuring our happiness levels and working out how our happiness levels might be boosted. Now this is very different, it should be pointed out. This is very different from the mention of happiness in the American Declaration of Independence. That Declaration of Independence, of which I am a big fan, said that human beings should have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. In other words, happiness cannot be imposed from on high, but is actually something that you must pursue through your own exercise of individual autonomy, through your own carving out of a path in life. Today, in contrast, we have officials and people at the UN who really think they can make us happy, who devote themselves to boosting this most intimate emotion. And this brings to mind Huxley's Brave New World. Because in that book, the tyrannical rulers also devote themselves to promoting what they call universal happiness. And in fact, one of the people who rebels against the government in that novel, very strikingly, he says the following: I want freedom, I want goodness, I want sin, I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. And I think today we should also claim the right to be unhappy and fat and drunk and eco-unfriendly against our rulers who think they can police our bodies, colonize our minds, and transform our emotions themselves. And then alongside the nanny state's colonization of the body and the nudge industry's colonization of the mind, we also have the state's relentless intervention into relationships. This is one of the most pernicious forms of state authoritarianism today, but I think it's too often ignored by libertarians. And one of the reasons it's too often ignored is because the main victims of this form of state intervention are poor people. Not necessarily people who drink fancy wine and don't like being thrown out of their club at 1 in the morning, but poor people, referred to by David Cameron as chaotic families, referred to by other politicians as problem families. This intervention into relationships takes many different forms. There is officialdom's branding of entire groups as problematic. There is the phenomenon of parenting classes, where some parents are actually forced by law to attend parenting classes in order to correct how they look after their children. There is the increasingly influential idea of early years, the idea that what happens to a child in the first 5 years of his life will determine his future fortunes, which has given rise to all forms of intervention in the early years of the child's life. And so what we have is a state which even wants to tell us how to raise our children, how we should relate to people in our own family, our own mothers, our own fathers, our own offspring. A state which presumes that it has the authority to determine how private life itself should be lived. And I think one of the most pernicious ways in which this is done at the moment is actually through the redefinition of marriage. And this is one mistake I think libertarians have made. They have fallen in line behind the idea that gay marriage is the greatest idea humanity has had for the past 20 years, without realizing that it's being promoted by governments who are single-mindedly determined to intervene in family life. And that is not a contradiction. And the reason that is not a contradiction is because gay marriage has allowed these authoritarians leeway to redefine intimate relationships, to redefine what it means to be a mother, what it means to be a father, what it means to be married. And I think one of the greatest mistakes libertarians have made over the past 3 or 4 years is to accept at face value what is presented as a liberal campaign, but is in fact another instance of state intervention into how we define our relationships and what marriage itself means. So in essence, what we have today is a dictatorship of do-gooders. That's what we live under, a dictatorship of do-gooders who are determined to colonize every area of our lives. And I think it's not enough to call this a nanny state. Because what we are really witnessing is an historic winding back of the Enlightenment itself. We are watching an historical winding back of the idea of moral autonomy, freedom, choice, the ideas that gave rise to the modern world. What we are witnessing is the policing of every aspect of our lives. Our moral lives, our physical lives, our social lives. Nannies don't do that. Tyrants do that. Very finally, these nannies and nudgers and relationship police always say that they are trying to make us all more responsible. That's all they're doing. They're trying to encourage us to take more responsibility for our lives, for our communities, and so on. What they don't understand is that you can only take real responsibility for your life if you are free, if you are morally autonomous, if you have made a choice. In the words of John Stuart Mill, the human faculties of perception, judgment, mental activity, and even moral preference are exercised only in making a choice. The mental and moral muscles are only improved by being used. Today, we are constantly discouraged from using our mental and moral muscles. Instead, officials think on our behalf, moralize on our behalf, parent on our behalf, and even exercise willpower on our behalf. The end result is emasculated citizens, divided families, tense communities, and less freedom. Today, we really have to worry about more than the right to smoke and the right to get pissed. It is the right to be a real, thoughtful, morally independent human being that is being taken away from us.
Thank you. That was wonderful, Brendan. Thank you for that. We do have time for some Q&A, but I'm going to steal one more minute of your life before I do that, because I forgot to mention... I mentioned, I think, 4 events before. I forgot the biggest one. And that is, and you guys get to be the first to hear this, because we only arranged it on the car ride in here, that Brendan O'Neill is the latest person we can add to the list of speakers for the Friedman conference, which is coming up on the 3rd and 4th... Yeah, please, clap. Coming up on the 3rd and 4th of May. It is in Sydney, so you'll have to get a flight, but it is very worthwhile coming. Brendan's not the only person in this room who will be speaking there. We also have Judith Sloan, who's very kindly... Look, we've got a few people, so you can't clap them all, right? So, one more clap. Apologies to the next people because of that. But also, some of you may remember the first ever Friedman dinner we had where we invited a speaker. That speaker was Graham Haycroft, and in a wonderful turnaround of events, all right, go on. In a wonderful closing of the circle now, Graham has agreed to come and speak at the Friedman conference. So from Friedman dinner to Friedman conference, thank you. And we will also have Gary Johns. He doesn't know this yet. Or is he? Oh, okay. But we are going to find a spot for you there as well. You're going to be in this panel session. And the other speakers include 3 other international guests. We've got Sinclair Davidson, Henry Ergas, and Judith Sloan all combined. And as I'd like to say in regards to those 3 economists, if they agree they're unstoppable, if they disagree there'll be fireworks, either way you'll want to be there. So definitely come along to that. But anyway, I've stolen that minute that I said I was going to steal, so I'll stop doing that now. And we have a time for Q&A. We also, before I go to Q&A, something more important. And that is to see if Paul is around to keep bringing us food.
He is.
He is?
Yeah.
Alright, so the food has been turned back on now. And Nat would kill me if I didn't let her ask the first question.
Hello. You were awesome. Congratulations. I saw, this is actually stemming from Facebook, where all good things stem from. You made a status, I think, about the what happened to the guy, the Mozilla executive who was sacked for making opinions about gay marriage, whatever the hell it was. Something ridiculous, and he was sacked as a result. And it was like, oh, well, you know, this is sort of not really discriminatory. I'm not sure, I don't want to sort of paraphrase what he said. And then Muppet came in and said, yeah, Muppet, that's you. Said, oh, well, you know, social pressure is what we as libertarians should be using in order to combat bad beliefs compared to the state being used as the mechanism. And I just thought those are kind of two different sort of things as they come together, and I thought it would be a good opportunity for you to comment on that, considering you didn't rewrite comment stats. Okay. So, no.
You ask a question there where he gets to attack me, I'm going to leave it.
Okay, thank you. I think libertarians need to go back and read Mill on liberty, particularly the section on the tyranny of custom. And because the argument Mill makes is that actually law is not necessarily the worst form of restricting what people can think and what people can say. Legal restrictions are not necessarily the worst. He says that custom, or the idea of a received way of thinking, or general conformism, is worse. Because what that does is it pressurizes people in a very subtle but pernicious way to accept the ideology of the time in which they live. I think gay marriage is the perfect example of that. I've never experienced an issue in recent times which is so stifling and so conformist and so difficult to dissent from. And in fact, I wrote an article a year ago saying that this is becoming an extremely authoritarian, and I wouldn't be surprised if people start to lose their livelihoods or to be shunned from polite society if they stood up against gay marriage, and now that's happening. So I think there's a number of, I mean, you know, we don't want this all to become a discussion about gay marriage because it's quite a depressing issue, but there are a number of aspects of gay marriage which I just think libertarians need to be a bit more critical about. The extent to which it allows state intervention and redefinition of family life, and the way in which to criticise it is very hard. And when it's hard to criticise something, that's usually a sign that a conformist force field has been put up around it. And that's something libertarians should be suspicious of. I don't think gay marriage is a libertarian issue. I think it's a state issue disguised as a kind of 1950s style civil rights thing. So stop it, you know. think a bit more about it.
I'm going to defend libertarians. I know you didn't come here to listen to me, but in 20 seconds, say libertarians don't stand up for this. I do not know a libertarian that does not believe in marriage deregulation. The reason you don't hear it is because no one in the media ever says, hey, I've got an issue, let's ask a libertarian. We're saying it to each other until we're blue in the face, but we're just speaking to each other, right? So that's my defense of libertarianism on that. Okay, someone else. Let's go, I'll come back to you, but let's go down the far end for in case, I'll forget them later, so.
Hey, Brennan. Thanks for your talk. I'm just interested, so, I mean, I spent the last 13 years in China and Hong Kong, and we fought a lot of battles, nanny-state part battles in Hong Kong, anti-smoking and all the rest of it. And yet the society across the border is different. And I'm just wondering, when you use the term, you know, and totalitarian and the 1984s and the Brave New Worlds and what have. I mean, is there a difference in degree, or is it a difference in kind? That type of paternalistic nanny-state stuff that you get in Hong Kong and much greater degree in the rest of the Western world, or is it the same thing but simply where the state can do a lot more things with the less affluent society, because they have the traditions of liberty that existed for a longer period of time? Just your thoughts.
Well, I think one of the interesting things about China, just going slightly broader, is that actually there's been, in my experience, there's been more agitation there about the nanny state. I've been in China a few times in recent years, and for example, they've reacted really strongly against smoking bans. And the last time I was there, people were barricading themselves into pubs and refusing to let the police in so they could finish their cigarettes. And if we did more of that in the West, I'd be pretty happy. So what's interesting about China is that they seem to accept not having profound democratic rights and other liberties, but they're really agitated by certain lifestyle policing, and I think that's a pretty healthy response. But I think in relation to Orwell and 1984 and other things, people sometimes say, if you mention that, people sometimes say, oh, you're exaggerating, it's not that bad. But the whole point of 1984, people always think 1984 is all about the CCTV cameras and you know, the 2-minute hate and all those things. But actually it's about state intervention into private relationships. That's what it's about. It's about children spying on parents, which we now have. Children are now sent home from school, certainly in Britain, and have to make notes about how eco-friendly their parents are. When they go back to school, the parents tell them to, you know, you have to tell your parents to be more eco-friendly. You know, so there's child spies who spy. We have lots of intergenerational angst today. There's intervention into how people have sex. You know, the government in 1984 is really suspicious of the sex instinct. We've seen that a great deal over the past 20 years with the rise of the crazy idea of safe sex, which is, you know, such an oxymoron. So I think what we're seeing is something very like 1984 in the sense that we have increased state intervention into family life. And I would encourage everyone to reread 1984 if you haven't read it for a while, because you will see that it is primarily about state intolerance of private relationships. And that is the key problem we face today. I think we face it mostly in the West, and I think it's creeping in the East as well. But in my experience, there's a healthy suspicion of some of these things in the East, which I think is being is not so pronounced in the West, which is a concern.
So I think the next question has to go to the man who came here, who was brave enough to come to a libertarian evening with Brendan O'Neill, having just written for the Fairfax News saying that words like wog should be illegal to say, and that if you make bad thoughts, that should be a crime. So I think if he's willing to come here and ask a question, he's definitely brave enough to deserve a microphone.
Brendan, can I congratulate you on what was a really profoundly good speech. I'd like to raise a historical, you talked about China, I'd like to raise a historical warning. In the beginning of the Song dynasty, Neo-Confucianism, which presented a real challenge to the state, was snuffed out because the state bought out the Neo-Confucianist scholars. And I'm very concerned that the welfare state does exactly the same thing. Because the welfare state says the government will pay you money for childcare, or we will pay you money for this, or we will pay you money for that, provided that you send your children to a childcare centre of which we approve. And my great concern is that the real threat to our liberty is in fact the welfare state, because the welfare state is in fact yet another means by which the state exercises pernicious control over our freedom. And I'd like your thoughts on that subject.
When I get famous to be asked, I'll say that the welfare state leads inevitably to the nanny state.
Yeah, I'm really not a fan of the welfare state at all, and the problem with the welfare state is that the more it expands, the more it undermines people's moral autonomy and capacity, actually, to make decisions about their lives, to live their lives as they want to. I think the problem is greatest in Britain, actually. I think that's where it's... Because what we have in Britain is whole entire towns and cities that are propped up by the welfare state, which have no internal logical reason to continue existing. But they're propped up by the welfare state as these kind of ghost towns, where people just kind of go through the motions and are not at all in control of their lives. However, I think I disagree with you slightly, because I think, yes, the welfare state is one of the greatest problems we face today. But I think there's also been an ideological shift. I don't think the welfare state naturally led to the nanny state or to modern day authoritarianism. I think there's also been a much more ideological shift towards something new and different. So if you look at the origins of the welfare state, for example, it was quite discreet. The idea was that when someone was in extreme hardship and literally could not afford to feed themselves, then the government had a responsibility to protect them. I think that's a good idea. I think it's a good idea. If someone's really down on their luck and are hungry, we have a collective responsibility to do something about that, whether it takes the form of charity or government or whatever. The problem is that the welfare state grew and grew and grew, so it became about not just looking after people in times of hardship, but looking after people forever. I think what's happened with the nanny state and the nudge state and the intervention into relationships is more to do with the decline of bigger politics, the decline of the idea of politics as being about a new vision for society or a new vision for how to run the economy. The more those kind of big vision politics have declined, the more politics has become about the politics of behaviour, as Labour calls it. And that's a relatively recent development. The welfare state has existed for a long time. Even Karl Marx wrote about early versions of the welfare state. So the welfare state idea has existed for a long time, but the corrosion of the line between what a government should do and what a government shouldn't do is relatively new. So I think the welfare state feeds into this, but there's been an ideological break with the past, and it's that which I think we should look into.
Brendan, thanks for that address. I agree with it. It was profound and very thought-provoking. Only two questions. The first one's probably a bit obvious, but I'm interested in your views. Having spent a large part of my life fighting for dominion over my liver and stomach, and generally winning, what right then do I have to visit the consequences of that on the collective as a society? And then secondly, I think you're right about the path that we are well advanced down in terms of the rollback and the Enlightenment. What to do about
it? People always ask this question, if you support individual liberty, the right to drink, the right to smoke, the right to be ill, should there also be a collective responsibility to catch those people when they fall? I think yes, but that's because I'm an old lefty, right? And none of you here probably are not old lefties. I think yes, there should be, because let's take the example of smokers. Everyone always says, oh, you smoke 20 cigarettes a day, why on earth should we look after you? Go away, you should just die in a corner. That's what they say, basically, to smokers. Extremely inhumane argument. But the fact is that smokers are really beneficial to the health system for two reasons. Firstly, because they give it loads of money through tax, because they pay ridiculous amounts of tax on the things that they buy. And secondly, because they die early. And you have all these old people living to 100, which I think is fantastic, by the way, who cost a lot of money because they're healthy. They cost money because they're healthy, and they live for a long time, and the state has to pay for them, which I think is fine, by the way. Smokers die earlier, generally speaking, and they die earlier having pumped loads of money into the health system. So this idea that unhealthy people are a burden of the collective is not true. They actually contribute a lot to the collective through having the grace to die early and through tax. So, but more importantly, at a principled level, I think if we are serious about allowing people to be free in their individual lives, to make choices and to do what they want, we also need to have a collective framework in which we can allow that to happen. And that can be an ideological framework in which we promote the value of freedom, which I think we should do. And it can also be a social framework in which we catch people when they fall. So people who play rugby, they know that there's a risk that they will be injured. But society should say, okay, cool, rugby's great, go and do it, and we'll catch you if something bad happens to you. People who like to get drunk every Saturday night, for the vast majority of people, it's not a problem. But every now and then they'll fall off a balcony, or they'll injure themselves, or they'll get stomach poisoning. And if we are serious about individual liberty, then we need a framework in which we can catch people when those things happen. So I see the collective actually as not taking away from individual liberty, but helping to promote it and to defend it. So I think we should allow people to live the lives they want to live. When they fall ill or when they get injured as a result, fix them, send them off again. That's how the medical system should work. In recent years, if you look back at historical discussions about the philosophy of medicine, it was actually all about how do you fix people when they're ill in order that they can carry on living their lives as freely as possible. It's only recently that medical discussions have become about How can we stop them from doing these things? How can we prevent them from falling ill? How can we prevent them from smoking? We need to go back to the original philosophical idea of medicine, which is that you fix people when they're hurt, then they choose for themselves how they live their lives. That's how I think we should see it.
We're running out of time, so given we've got lots of people who want to ask questions, after Jim gets his in, I think you should all have to pay to ask a question. You're right. Capitalist group.
Brendan, you might not remember, but against Elio about 4 years ago, you owe me a scotch. James Allen, I'm sorry I came in late. I feel dirty. I was doing an ABC thing, so I need to drink a lot. So, having come in late, I can't really ask anything other than a lighthearted question. So first let me hold up this week's Spectator, and now I'll ask how the whale meat was tonight.
Okay, yes. I have an article in the Spectator defending whaling by the Japanese. I had whale meat once in Iceland. It was really tasty. But I think I am so serious about freedom and choice that I think even the Japanese people should have the choice to hunt whales. That's how serious I am. And more to the point, I just wish the Japanese would stop with all this crap about it being for scientific research, because it's obviously they enjoy it. It's like fox hunters in Britain. Fox hunters in Britain always say, the reason we hunt foxes is to keep the, to protect our cattle and badgers and everything. And then you think, well, why do you put on red jackets and have trumpets and go out in teams of four? That's not an effective form of pest control. People should be more honest. You do these things because they're fun. Frederick Engels described fox hunting as the most fun you could ever have. If the Japanese said that about whaling, I would be right behind them. These things are fun, they're bracing, they're interesting, they're exciting. Whaling represents man's control of nature. That is to be defended. That's another Enlightenment value. Mankind should aspire to control nature, even whales.
That was beautiful.
Graham Hackcroft, Brendan, that was fabulous, and we've got two things in common at least. The first is I'm an old lefty too. I even voted for Gough Whitlam twice, would you believe? So I learned my lesson, and you will too. And the other thing, I too have had whale in Iceland. And I really don't understand the psychology of this. Has anybody gone to see those lovely little calves running around the field? You shoot them or eat them, it's lovely. And what's so different about a bloody whale? Anyway, that's not my question. By the way, John, here's the $20 for the... It's alright, I'm just going to buy the right to ask the question. I hadn't really thought very much about the gay marriage. It was just one of those that didn't really affect me, and I just sort of was in the background. And I'm not the first person to think this, but why indeed should the government be involved in marriage at all? If you like to expand on that concept, wouldn't that, as a core thing, wouldn't that solve all the problem about gay marriage if we just said, why should the government be involved in marriage? If you want to get married, that's cool. There's plenty of churches that want to do it. Why do you have to get married and be blessed by the government, for crying out loud? Could you comment on that and expand on it?
Love is only love if you tell Tony Abbott.
Yeah, I agree with that. In the long term, I would like a situation where the government is not involved in marriage. The problem with the gay marriage situation is that it's inviting more government intervention into marriage. That's the problem with it. It's in Britain, for example, which I obviously know more about, the government has now issued laws and documents and regulations redefining marriage as a relationship between two people, right? But for a great number of people, it's about far more than that. It's a relationship that is about creating a family. It's a relationship that glues you to society itself. It's a relationship that glues you to future generations. The government has unilaterally redefined marriage to mean something that it thinks is a valuable form of marriage. It's going through old documents and removing terms like mother and father, right? Because that's going to be problematic when you have gay marriage. It's removing terms like husband and wife. It's very Orwellian rewriting of language, this Orwellian rewriting of documents, which speaks to me to more state intervention into our relationship rather than less. So I agree with you that the ideal is that there should be no government intervention in this area. The problem with the gay marriage campaign, which libertarians have not thought about remotely because they like being popular for once in their lives, is that they are implicitly inviting more state intervention into the very meaning of our relationships. Not just into saying, yes, you're now married, here's a certificate, but into the definition of marriage itself. The state has brokered marriage for a very long time. 150 years in Britain, longer in some other places. But it hasn't ever defined the meaning of marriage. That's a communal, organic thing that is generated over thousands of years. Gay marriage has allowed them to redefine the meaning of marriage. That is a problem, and libertarians need to be really aware that on this issue, they are leading the charge for state intervention and redefinition of private relationships.
Brendan, this is neither a question nor an answer. I just want to mention degrees of separation. I used to read Living Marxism. I had a subscription to LM magazine. I went to a number of RCP events, and even back in those days I found it astonishing that I could feel most comfortable in amongst a group who called themselves revolutionary communists. I'd very much like to thank you for talking tonight.
Thank you. Well, for those of you who don't know, I used to be a member of something called the Revolutionary Communist Party. Years ago, when I was 18 years old, we published a magazine called Living Marxism. But the thing is, this is the secret that no one knows. Marxists are the best libertarians, right? Not modern-day Marxists. They're a bunch of idiots who think the state is the answer to every solution in every problem in the world. But the original Marxists, Marx himself, Engels, the anti-Stalinists of the 1910s and the 1920s and the 1930s, you will not find better libertarians than those people. Read Marx on press freedom. Read Engels or any of the others on the withering away of the state. These were people who were convinced of the idea that individuals were capable of running their own lives without needing tradition or the state or anyone else to tell them how to do it. The problem is that the left has completely lost its way. It's now anti-progress, anti-economic growth, pro-state, pro-welfare, all the things it used to criticise, it now supports. That's the problem. So I still consider myself a Marxist and a libertarian, and I don't think there's a contradictory at all, because the Marxists are the best libertarians, and you should all look into that. Read those early books.
Well, that's just Lysander Spooner and Benjamin Tucker as better 19th century anarchists. But speaking of communists, the dear leader had a question.
My question was about, I guess, UKIP and the Liberal Democrats tracking the youth food quote away from the Tories and traditionally the Labor Party. What do you think are the causes of that?
British politics is really screwed up at the moment. I mean, it's even worse than Australian politics. It's really bad. What we have is a situation where the Labour Party no longer represents the labouring classes in any way whatsoever. The Tory Party no longer represents the traditional kind of upper classes. In fact, is constantly distancing themselves from those people. So we have the emergence of these newer parties. UKIP is the best example, which is kind of sucking votes not only from the Tories but also from Labour. There are other smaller parties and independent candidates who are kind of sucking up all these kind of voters who just don't know where they belong. And I think that's what UKIP represents. UKIP's success is built on the corrosion of traditional politics in Britain. I think we're seeing a similar thing in countries around the West, where the more the left-right divide collapses, the more that Labour, social democratic parties in particular, lose any connection with ordinary people, the more you're seeing the rise of these kind of newer parties, which then the social democrats describe as racist or fascistic or far-right or stupid or crazy, not realising that it's their own profound failures and their own profound not only a disconnection with their traditional vote, but a turning against their traditional voters, which leads people to support these new parties. So I think UKIP is a prime example of a party that benefits from the emptying out of traditional politics itself. And I think we're seeing a similar thing you know, with Palmer and other people like that. A similar thing in countries around the West, where people are benefiting from the emptying out of traditional politics.
All right, so maybe one more question so that we can get back into food, and then you all have a chance to have a beer with Brendan and buy Brendan a beer. Is there? We've got a few, well, maybe more than one question.
Brendan, you mentioned that you were left libertarian. How do you see that as different to right libertarianism at all? And is there a left libertarian movement, and what are they doing? What are their programs?
Yeah, what are they doing?
There are left libertarians, not many. You know, you can count them on one hand. They're a dying breed. You know, Christopher Hitchens was a good example. I'm not a huge fan of Christopher Hitchens, but he was a good example. There are a few in Britain. I think the difference is, this is from my personal experience, so no offence to anyone in this room. The difference is that right-wing libertarians are obsessed with things like smoking and drinking and having sex without a condom, right? Which is great, we all love doing those things. But left-wing libertarians, in my view, have a broader view of the attack on freedom and the problem of state intervention into personal life and into family life. I wish right-wing libertarians would talk more about the attack on poor families, the intervention into people's lives who are not necessarily in this place tonight, who don't know that these events occur, but whose liberty is still being undermined in a very dramatic fashion. So I think that's the key difference. I think, personally speaking, left libertarians have a more profound understanding of the problem of freedom today, and right-wing libertarians, in my view, have a slightly more surface-driven concern about lifestyle issues. But I'm willing for you all to prove me wrong later on.
Right, so Brendan hasn't had a chance to have dinner, and he's probably quite thirsty by now. So I think we probably do you want to call it a day, or one more question? One more question? All right, Gabe, then you get the lucky last one.
Hey.
I love the fact that right-wingers are blamed for only caring about sex and drugs. That's wonderful.
Thanks, Brendan. So we identified all the problems, the finger waggers, the thought controllers, and those sort of things. What action do we take? You know, do we play within the system and try and replace them with our own? Do we take the passive resistance route, or do we go and barricade ourselves in an apartment and smoke our little hearts out? What are the best strategies for ridding ourselves of this menace?
I think we need to start actually regenerating a trust in the public. And this is another problem with libertarianism today, which is that often libertarians defend liberty, but they don't seem to trust in the public's capacity to be free. So that's something we really need to work on. I think we need to trust the public. I was recently asked in a discussion, what do you think about Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act? And I said it should be completely scrapped, there should be no laws whatsoever. And then they said to me, oh, do you support the right of racists? I said, no, I support the right of all Australians, firstly, to know that these prejudices exist, and secondly, to pass judgment on them. And if you look at the Enlightenment, if you read Spinoza on freedom of speech, or John Locke on freedom of conscience, or John Stuart Mill on freedom of speech, what they all argued was that the public can be trusted to deal with dangerous ideas, dodgy facts, stupid arguments. Their defense of freedom of speech wasn't driven by a love for the person doing the speaking, but rather by a trust in the public to be able to understand those ideas and to work out which were good and which were bad. The whole Enlightenment is based on the idea that humanity itself is capable of, as John Locke said, living by the light of his own reason. Individuals should live by the light of their own reason. The problem we have today is that the nanny state doesn't trust us to live by the light of our own reason, and too many libertarians don't emphasize strongly enough the ability of everyone, whether they're poor or rich, whether they smoke or don't smoke, to live by the light of their own reason. That's what we need to recover, a trust in the public and in their right to determine their destinies free from state intervention.
Yeah, look, to be fair, I wouldn't have answered your question either. So, I think that's enough for now. So if you could all join me in thanking Brendan for coming in. We've got more food coming out, so eat to your heart's content. And please come and bail Brendan up and tell him why he was wrong later. And I'll see many of you on the 22nd, and if not, then next time, inshallah.